department for the Orange County, It was created by the Board of Commissioners in 2015 to oversee, support, and enhance programming for individuals in the criminal justice system at risk for involvement in further criminal activities. In this role, she oversees the pretrial release program and youth and adult pre-arrest diversion programs, 2 treatment courts, the local reentry council. This is a lot, Caitlin. The restoration legal counsel position, the street outreach program, and youth and adult mental health and substance use services for individuals in custody or at risk. Prior to her position, Caitlin worked for 8 years as the Deputy Capital Defender for the Office of the NC Capital Defender. After graduating from UNC School of Law in 1994, Caitlin worked as Assistant Public Defender at the Defender Association of Philadelphia, the Bronx Defenders, and the Orange County Public Defender's Office. In addition, she spent 2 years as an attorney at the Center for Death Penalty Litigation. You've got a lot of experience, and we're looking forward to everything you have to say this evening. Thank you, Caitlin.
Well, thank you, Vicki, and thank you, Krishna. And it's so nice to be here, and happy birthday to the League. That is quite fortuitous. I feel honored to be able to be here during the birthday month, and of course, Black History Month. And as you know, I think all of you are well aware that the criminal justice system disproportionately impacts people of color, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But I think it's appropriate that we sort of be talking about ways to reduce the inequities in the criminal justice system and look for alternatives to justice involvement, particularly this month. So thank you for having me here. And I am going to put up a PowerPoint, or at least try. Oh, look at that. The slideshow is working, I think. Very good. Do you see just the slide? Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So I think Vicki's already given quite a rundown of the Criminal Justice Resource Department, but as I was mentioning to her before we went live, you know, the Criminal Justice Resource Department is really unique to Orange County. There are other counties in North Carolina and other places in the country that have a Criminal Justice Resource Department or something similar. But the way that the county commissioners in Orange County created this department, it was really for the specific reason of trying to find alternatives to pretrial incarceration, therapeutic outcomes in the courts, and serving folks who get ensnared in the justice system differently. We all know that Orange County is unique, but with this department, it really is unique. And for me, having been at the Capital Defender's Office, having been a trial lawyer, a public defender for all of my career, I had started to work on some policy issues related to the death penalty. And this idea of coming to a newly formed department that was going to work on trying to help people stay out of the system felt really important after having been sort of the last stop for people in the system, people facing capital cases, capital trials, and facing the death penalty. At that point, there was, you know, people came so damaged by the time I got involved in a case at the trial level. And it made me, you know, really think about how if we had been able to do more interventions along the way, you know, starting even as, you know, as youth, maybe this person would not be in the situation where they're looking at maybe the best outcome being life without parole and the worst outcome being a death sentence. So it really felt important to shift my career in this way to sort of work on policy at the upfront level. So I think Vicki went over the mission, but it really is a mission to keep people. It's, you know, interestingly enough, I've worked in the criminal justice system my whole career, but the goal of my department is really to keep people out of the criminal justice system, to make sure we don't have to see them in the courthouse, to especially where they have mental health issues or substance use issues. We want them treated in a more therapeutic setting than the criminal justice system. But it's not just about keeping people out of the system. We know there are going to be people who end up in our system, and deservedly so. And we want to make sure that we are keeping them safe if they have to be detained, making sure they're getting medications, making sure that that when they get out of the system, that our local reentry council is supporting them, because they are coming back into our community, and we don't want them. We want them to be employed. We want them to be able to get housing, and we want them to lead productive lives so they don't come back to the criminal justice system. So we sort of work with people before they get there, while they're in the system, and then after they come back from the criminal justice system. So the full gamut. And we're really looking at reimagining the criminal justice system. And there are a lot of people who don't call it a criminal justice system. They call it a criminal legal system, because they're not sure how much justice is actually imparted. But I think, we are very fortunate to be in a place with wonderful court stakeholders here in Orange County and Chatham County. And I think you said you covered Durham as well, Krishna? So, and Durham as well. So people, I think, in the criminal legal system that truly do care about individuals that are justice involved. So we are fortunate that doesn't exist everywhere. But we still need to look at ways to deflect people from the system, to divert them from the system once they get into the system, to apply and educate on harm reduction and therapeutic interventions, looking at alternatives to incarceration, looking at supporting people on reentry, and then helping to restore people's legal rights. Voting is a big one, as you might appreciate. In North Carolina, we're a state where you can get after a felony conviction or misdemeanor misdemeanor conviction does not disenfranchise you. A felony conviction does during the pendency of your sentence. But very few people realize that they have their rights restored to vote once they finish serving their sentence. And we spend time educating folks on that. We try to get people's driver's license reinstated. We try to get expungements of cases so that people, aren't those barriers for people to being, full citizens and residents of our county can be restored. I'm not going to go through all of the programs that we have. I think Vicki gave an overview, but I could give a separate presentation on all of these different programs, because they all involve some wonderful people in my office. I have 15 folks in my department who do just terrific work in the pretrial area. By that, I mean trying to inform judges about individuals who are booked into our detention center, so that they can be released that very next day by a judge who has information. We don't want to be keeping people in our jail that we don't need to keep in our jail. First of all, it's expensive. It's $110 a day for somebody in our jail. And we know just 3 days in jail results in a lot of instability to a person's life. It can affect obviously their job if they have one, their education, their family, their housing. So we want people that can safely remain in the community to stay in the community while their case is pending. Now, of course, there are some people who truly present a danger to society because of the severity of the offense or their prior record. And there are also people who have failed to appear for court. Those are the two categories of people that we want to see in our detention center. We don't want to see somebody on a misdemeanor larceny charge for stealing, we've had people stealing diapers, if you can believe it. Somebody stealing diapers who can't post $100 bond because they are, that poor that they were not able to afford diapers for their children. That's what we don't want to see. We want our detention center only to be for people who truly present those risks of not coming to court or a danger to the community. And by that, I don't mean just danger. I don't mean danger to property. I mean danger to people. So that's our pretrial program, and we can also supervise people on that. We have adult behavioral health folks. We have quite a few social workers and clinicians on our staff, and they work with people who are in our detention center, and people who are in the court system, doing assessments, trying to ensure that they get referred to appropriate treatment programming. We have a youth behavioral health social worker, and some of you may know her, Tammy Pfeiffer. She used to be the head of, or she started Boomerang, which is a wonderful program, nonprofit that works in Chapel Hill with kids who are suspended from school. But she's now our youth behavioral health liaison. We have 2 treatment courts for people who are justice involved, but are also have underlying significant and persistent substance use problems, issues. One for parents who have lost custody of their children due to substance use, with the hope that they can get their families back together again. And then one for people in the criminal courts who would be otherwise facing incarceration, but can go through treatment instead. We have the Restoration Legal Counsel is another lawyer position in our office, and that's the one who does, works on fines, fees, and costs, getting those remitted for people, getting driver's license restored, expungements. We're going to talk here mostly about the pre-arrest diversion programming, because that's what I think is on the agenda today. So I'll skip over that. The Local Reentry Council I just mentioned also is the entity that we have 2 staff members, a case manager and a coordinator, that work with people when they're coming back from prison to the community, hopefully reaching them before they get out so that they can develop a plan for them to help them with housing and employment and some resources that they may need. We have some funding from the Department of Public Safety to help people get back on their feet. And then our street outreach, harm reduction and deflection program, it works with people experiencing homelessness, helping them with housing plans, resources, case management, and also deflecting them from the criminal justice system. And you'd be amazed how many cases we see low-level minor misdemeanors in our court system, which are really about homelessness. There are people sleeping on a park bench. There are people urinating in public. Those are all ordinance offenses or chargeable offenses, and we see them in our criminal justice system. And really the underlying issue is that they're homeless. Often they have behavioral health issues compounding their housing insecurity. So we have a program of 3 peer navigators and a clinical coordinator that is based right downtown Chapel Hill, where the majority of our homeless population lives. But they've just been a recent addition to our department, and we share that program with the housing department because they have expertise in finding housing. So we're very proud of that program. But we're going to talk about the diversion programs. And this wasn't something that was on my plate when the department was created, but it became immediately apparent that if we really wanted to change and reimagine the criminal justice system, we had to keep people out of the system. And primarily, we want to keep youth that don't need to be in the criminal justice system. I think you all have heard about the school to prison pipeline, and that's real. The more you are involved and referred even in juvenile court or from the school for disciplinary or criminal conduct, the more likely you are as an adult to be part of the criminal justice system. I mean, there really is no question that justice involvement, even as a youth, leads to justice involvement as an adult. So youth and people with behavioral health issues, whether they be youth or adult, and then people who have been in the system over and over again because of underlying issues like homelessness or other behavioral health issues. So we have currently 3 programs that we offer here in Orange County. We have funding from Orange County for these programs. We also have some funding from the town of Chapel Hill, and we also have funding from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services for some of this work. This is a slide with the 3 different programs. The first one we're going to talk about is the original program that we had, OCPAD. That's a first offender diversion program. The second one we're going to talk about is the Lantern Project, and then we'll talk about the youth deflection. They all serve different populations, but all with the same goal of keeping people out of the system. So OCPAD is our pre-arrest diversion program. And as you can see from this slide, we have support from all of the Orange County law enforcement agencies. And this is critical because who comes into contact with someone committing an offense first? It's an officer from law enforcement, typically. Sometimes it's a resident, but at some point law enforcement is called. And how the program works is that law enforcement, when they have probable cause to believe an offense has occurred, a misdemeanor offense, and when I say misdemeanor, those are not violent offenses. Those are the lower level types of offenses that people can be charged with, like possession of marijuana, simple assault, larceny, misdemeanor larceny, shoplifting, those kinds of things. So the way the program works, OCPAD, is that law enforcement has the discretion to, instead of arresting or charging an individual with an offense, they can refer the person instead, with just giving them a card, to our social worker coordinator. And then that coordinator, whose name is Desmond Frierson, he's been with us since the beginning of the program. Within 72 hours, the individual who could have been charged with the offense has to call the coordinator and make contact. And then within 90 days, complete programming that's specifically designed by our social worker coordinator for that person. So it may be that the person does 25 hours of community service. It may be that they go get a mental health assessment and follow up with treatment recommendations. It may be that they go through a restorative justice process. So we have lots of different options for people. But what's critical is that no criminal charge is ever filed. So there is no public record that this person has ever been engaged with law enforcement. Law enforcement just holds their information for 90 days. And if the person completes the 90 days of programming, then the coordinator notifies law enforcement, and law enforcement just closes those documents, and there's never any public record that this person has ever been involved in any kind of criminal offense. So the program started in February of 2019. It served over 500 people, and 97% of them have been successful in that 90 days and have never had charges filed. Now, there are some people who have subsequently had new charges after that 90 days. That percentage comes down to about 87%, but still the vast majority not only complete the program, but remain arrest-free 2 years later. So it's an important program, not only for the individual who avoids having a criminal charge, but it's also really critical to educating people about the criminal justice system and the collateral consequences that come with a charge or a conviction. And so that's one of the things that our social worker does with each of the referrals, is talk about, this is what could have happened. You could have been charged. You could have had a charge on your record that you would have to reveal to a job. If you were applying for a job, you might have been convicted, you might have had probation, you could have gotten a jail sentence, you certainly would have probably had court costs and fees assessed. And just sort of educating them about what could have happened versus what law enforcement gave you the opportunity to do, and that is avoid a charge and go through some therapeutic interventions and put this in your past. Now, this is for first offenders. This is for people who with first-time criminal conduct. So we see a lot of students in this program. It's for 18 and older. They can't previously have had OCPAD diversion before. It has to be this slide says follow the slide for the list of eligible offenses. I did not bore you with all of those eligible offenses, but I will tell you that they are that kind of low-level misdemeanor offense that are eligible. And the person doesn't have to admit any guilt or responsibility. It's not about accountability in that way. It is an opportunity to intervene on a first-time offender with a lot of education about the criminal justice system and an assessment and referral to programming that hopefully will be beneficial to them. This is just a slide of sort of our agencies, our law enforcement agencies in Chapel Hill, and we get the majority of our referrals continues to be from the Chapel Hill Police Department. So that shows you sort of just some of it is where are our first offenders, and we have a lot of students in Chapel Hill, and they tend to be our folks that have certainly no record. It's inexplicable why Hillsborough Police Department has such a significant, and that continues to be the case. They just have really bought into the program and really like referring cases there. We should honestly have more from the sheriff's office. We have support from Sheriff Blackwood, but they tend to have more serious cases, less sort of traffic in the areas, that they are patrolling. So, and we get some people from the River State Park with drinking in the park, or swimming naked in the park, and various other things. So that was an interesting one. We didn't originally talk to them, but they really were enthusiastic about diverting folks and not having to come to court for them. So the individual never comes to court. The individual is never in the system. The individual simply works with our social worker after the interaction with the officer, and then once the case is closed, they've completed their programming. That's it. When we talk about equity issues, it's really important for us to track all of the data for our programs. Why are people, especially by demographic information, who's coming in, how is it disproportionate? Why are people not able, why are they being found ineligible? Well, the primary reason is because they, have prior charges. Well, as you can see from that second chart, it's disproportionately African American, and that's because African Americans are disproportionately impacted by police activity. So it's no secret why why that is, and when we look at this number on the side, here on the side, we see a lot more sort of equity, but the reality is that our criminal justice system is, even though our population is 12% African American in Orange County, about 12%, our criminal justice system is vastly different than that. Any day that you came into one of our courts, you would probably see a majority of people of color sitting in our courtrooms. So we constantly need to assess for that. And whenever there's discretion by law enforcement, or by any of us for that matter, whenever there's discretion, there's an opportunity for bias to creep in, implicit bias to creep in. So are we just seeing students being referred, college students being referred to diversion, or are we seeing all eligible people being referred? That's really something we try to pay close attention to, and try to gently talk with our law enforcement officers about. But we knew we were only serving a small population there in diverting people from the criminal justice system. And in order to really get to the equity issues, we sought a grant for the Lantern Project. And the Lantern Project has two prongs. One is diversion and one is reentry support. But the goal of the Lantern Project is to serve the population that is disproportionately impacted by behavioral health issues, the people that we're seeing in and out of our criminal justice system because of underlying issues, whether it's homelessness or whether it's a behavioral health issue like substance use. The people that are not being served by the criminal justice system, they're coming in and out because they're minor offenses, but we're not really engaging them and getting them the support that they need to deal with these underlying issues. Now, some of our more serious offenders, who can get into our treatment courts and things, they can be served by our criminal justice system. But I can assure you that people who come in for a second-degree trespass case are in and out of the system. And they're serving a night in jail, and then they're being released with a conviction, another conviction on their record. But we weren't seeing these people in diversion. And we wanted to be able to serve these people. In some ways, they're the critical population that we want to serve, because they're the ones that are most in need of the interventions that we can offer. So we sought a grant, and we were able to get it from DHHS. So this is funded through January of 2023. And right now, I mean, we're hopeful that it'll be funded beyond that. But for right now, the diversion piece is both a pre-arrest diversion. So when law enforcement interacts with the individual, they, again, like OCPAD, they have the opportunity to divert them to our social worker for the Lantern Project for pre-arrest diversion. And then we also have post-charge diversion. So they might be charged and they come into the criminal justice system, but then the district attorney's office can divert them back out again by referring them to the Lantern Project and say, we're going to dismiss this charge if this person complies. Again, it's usually 90 days. But the goal here is less about educating on collateral consequences. This population knows the collateral consequences. They're living with those collateral consequences of the system. So the goal is really to provide increased access to care and support to people that have a history of substance use, and specifically opioid use, because this, we know how serious that issue has taken off. And people who were involved chronically with the criminal legal system. So in addition to behavioral health services, the Lantern Project, also will provide education and information about COVID, and most importantly, discuss harm reduction efforts, and provide harm reduction interventions. And by that, I mean meeting people where they're at. So we don't demand abstinence to successfully complete the program. It may be that, we meet people where they are in terms of seeing some progress. So maybe they just get connected to a peer support specialist, somebody else with lived experience of recovery, and they communicate effectively with that person for 90 days. That is a step in the right direction. Maybe they get educated on how to get on medication-assisted treatment for their opioid use disorder. Maybe we make sure they know how to get an naloxone kit and clean syringes so that they don't overdose. We might give them fentanyl testing strips so that they can test something to see if fentanyl is in it, because we know that fentanyl is in every drug these days, and that's what causes overdoses. So this program looks a little different than the OCPAD program. It's different for every individual, and it depends on where they are in that process of treatment and recovery. Our social worker makes that determination when she does the intake with the individual, and our law enforcement, again, have fully bought into this, and our district attorney's office has fully bought into this. And the goal is that the case will be dismissed or no charges are ever brought if they do at least make some steps in the right direction in terms of harm reduction. And so it's a really interesting program. The clients are a much more high risk, high needs group. So it is often, there are times we don't have enough data yet. We started about 6 months ago, so we don't have a lot of data on measuring of success, but our success rate's not going to be as high. We're going to lose some of these people, hopefully not to an overdose. Hopefully we've given them some resources that will keep them with us, but it may not be that they follow through in the way that our UNC student who was referred for a shoplifting case will. But the ultimate goal is education, intervention, and support, and harm reduction. And most of the time, the same outcome if they're successful at whatever their measure of success is determined to be. they will either not have charges or the case will be dismissed. There's also a reentry component. We also work, Vicki, were you saying something? Oh, sorry. So there's also a reentry component to the Lantern Project, and it's similar. It's not diversion. So these are people who are in our detention center here in Hillsborough, and we have somebody going in every day, a social worker and clinician going in every day to talk to them about harm reduction, about getting them while they're in the jail connected, so that when they get out of the jail, they are immediately engaged with resources in the community. So there's no lapse of time. So that's not a diversion program, but it is an intervention program, which we think is really critical. Again, this is for adults. The Lantern Projects are 18 and older. They have to have had a history of substance use or a behavioral health issue, could be mental health. They have to have they can have prior cases, prior convictions. They can even have current charges that weren't referred. They can be detained, or they can be out of custody. They can be pre-charge or post-charge. And we don't take domestic violence cases in any of these programs, just because of the concerns around domestic violence. Although I will say domestic violence in this case is referring to intimate partner relationships. We will take a case for diversion, which involves, say, two sisters, which would technically be a domestic violence charge, but you know, it does not have the same concerns that an intimate partner domestic violence case has. We don't take traffic charges, and we don't take the use of anything that involves the use of a weapon, and usually that's a firearm. We will take, somebody's found with a small knife or something like that that's not related to a violent offense, we could take that. But we'll take felonies in this program. It could be a possession of cocaine, that's a felony. Possession of heroin, I mean, those are ideal cases for people obviously with substance use issues. We want to work with those folks as well. And then our final diversion program is the Youth Deflection Program. Some of you may remember a program called the Misdemeanor Diversion Program, or MDP. Durham still has an MDP program. We had one here that was serving 16 and 17-year-olds and diverting them prior to raise the age. 16 and 17-year-olds in North Carolina were treated as adults. And so we had a misdemeanor diversion program to allow law enforcement to divert 16 and 17-year-olds from the adult system, again, to a similar program. But when raise the age was passed by our legislature in December, or went into effect December of 2019, instead of continuing with sort of that 18 to 25-year-old range who were in adult court, we decided to create the OC PAD program to serve everyone 18 and older. But one of the interesting things that happened is that our law enforcement said, although we know that now 16 and 17-year-olds go to the juvenile justice system, we're concerned about what happens in the juvenile justice system and whether we're perpetuating the school to prison pipeline, whether there are other alternatives to the juvenile justice system that might be beneficial for our 16 and 17-year-olds, like MDP was. So Tammy Pfeiffer, who I mentioned was the former director of Boomerang and is also a licensed clinical social worker with lots of experience working with youth, wanted to take this on in addition to her other responsibilities. So now we have a youth deflection program, and that's for law enforcement who could have charged an individual as a juvenile, instead can refer them directly to Tammy for an assessment, and again, interventions that usually will last about 90 days. But are designed to sort of address the specific issues of the youth. And it may be that the youth doesn't have any particular issues. I mean, I think we all know that kids do stupid things sometimes, and it may not be because of an underlying issue. It may just be because their frontal lobe is not fully developed, and they steal something from a store. But they really don't need to go into any kind of significant treatment programs. They just need to sort of be educated about what could have happened. Maybe do a little community service, maybe do some restorative justice to sort of understand, why this was harmful. But we're really pleased about this, because although in juvenile court there's no public record, we know that outcomes can really be impacted once you get into that juvenile justice system, not because everyone there isn't trying to do what's best for the youth, but you have, probation, you have, court involvement, you miss school, you're having to follow through on a whole lot of things. It tends to be that the outcomes, unfortunately, are not good. Sometimes they are good, but not every kid under 18 needs to be in the juvenile justice system for a minor offense. So that's what our youth deflection program allows. And again, our law enforcement have all supported it, and it's in their discretion who they're going to divert. If a youth is already involved in the juvenile justice system, they are not eligible. At that point, they're already getting services in the juvenile justice system. This is for a young kid who who shouldn't have any current juvenile justice involvement, and can be appropriately treated with, sort of much more minor interventions than what the juvenile justice system can provide. Again, if they complete the program, then there's no juvenile petition ever filed. They never come to court. If they don't complete the program, law enforcement is informed, and they have the option of, sending the kid to juvenile court, or sending the youth to juvenile court. 17 years or younger is the eligibility, no pending juvenile cases. We can't do significant restitution. If there's somebody were to damage a lot of property, we wouldn't be able to handle that. That would have to go through the court system, through juvenile justice. And again, we get cases directly from the schools. We get cases from law enforcement. And we get cases, from the magistrates sometimes. So, but I'm going to switch gears a little to just tell you why all of this harm reduction effort, especially with the Lantern Project, is so critical. I think, we're all becoming aware of how things have gotten so difficult for people, but especially people with behavioral health concerns, especially with people with housing instability or insecurity. This has been a really tough time for so many people, but particularly the folks that we tend to work with. So this is just obviously, drug overdose is now the #1 cause of death in our country for people under 50. In the last 12 months, and this was about a year ago, 93,000 overdose deaths. We're going to see those numbers skyrocket this year and next year. But particularly justice-involved populations are impacted by the opioid epidemic and substance use. So this is some data from the Department of Health and Human Safety, but they're in North Carolina prisons, 70% of those there are self-identified with a substance use disorder. We think it's higher in our detention center. We do track that data in our Orange County Jail. Over 50% of people in our prison system are there for drug-related crimes, which is a pretty good indication that they have underlying substance use issues. And this is the statistic that is just so upsetting. Within the first 2 weeks after release from prison, the risk of an opioid overdose death is 40 times higher for a formerly incarcerated person than the general population. And there was a case just 2 days ago of an individual who was charged, and this was not here, this was in Halifax County or Warren County, had been charged with capital murder. The case was dismissed for lack of evidence after the person had been in for 3 years. A huge victory for the attorneys and for justice. He was innocent. He was released. 2 days later, he overdosed and died. And that's because the risk is so high if you have been incarcerated and you have previously had an opioid use disorder. So it's really critical that we get to folks as they're leaving jail and prison. This is, again, a number that has dramatically increased now, but this was based on 2 years ago. 28,000 people had died in North Carolina from an overdose, and every day 8 people in our state die of an overdose. Again, those numbers are going to go up dramatically. This probably you can't see too well, but this is a slide that sort of talks about, and again, this ends in 2020. So this has the rates of Orange County versus North Carolina of drug overdose deaths. And you can see that it really spiked, and it's going to spike again when you see those 2021 numbers. And this is another piece. It's not just drug overdose. It's not just an increase in substance use. We're seeing from 2018, I think probably most of you are familiar with what a commitment is, involuntary or voluntary commitment to the emergency department is because a person is either is in some kind of psychiatric crisis, either a threat to themselves, harming themselves or others. In 2018, we had a total of 2,321 people that had to be transported and taken to UNC for a mental health commitment. In 2021, we had 3,392. So just in 3 years, there had been a 46% increase and that's just the people who were actually showing up at the ED or being driven to the ED by EMS. Of course, there's many, many more people who are suffering in crisis that aren't getting treated at the emergency room. And, we see that turnaround of people being released out of the emergency department, which is strapped with COVID and with all sorts of other complications. Those people are, turned around within 24 hours, and that's not uncommon, to be in crisis one day and released from the hospital the next. It's really critical that we do everything we can to support people with behavioral health issues, because the outcomes, whether they're justice involved or not, can be so, they can be deadly, right? I just wanted to end with a little bit of data, just because, this harm reduction work and this therapeutic work is important across the board, but there is particular risk for people who have a history of justice involvement. So I will stop sharing and invite anybody that might have questions for me.
Well, I'm very interested in this increase you expect in drug use and mental health issues over the next few years. Is it something that's just growing drug use, or is it a reaction to COVID and isolation?
Yeah, I think it's that. I think people are facing serious isolation. I think people are not working or having financial hardships. I think people have become disconnected. I think there hasn't been in-person treatment opportunities for a long time. So people, who might have otherwise been attending groups or individual treatment were having to do it virtually for the last 2 years, or, not at all if they didn't have the ability to, have a laptop in front of them and be able to do virtual treatment. Our treatment programs were closed down for in-person. And so that means, and that's across the country, people are not getting the treatment that they needed. Residential programs are congregate settings, so they were not taking people into residential programs. So just, yeah, it's the lack of treatment opportunities. It's the circumstances that we sort of all find ourselves in coming out of this unreal sort of situation. And I think I think it's magnified for, people who are the most vulnerable among us.
Well, I have to tell you, about a year ago, we had a program with a psychiatrist and a historian to talk about what happened after the 1918 flu pandemic. And
Interesting.
the psychology seems to be that people coming out of isolation are so in need of socialization that they sometimes make rash decisions. So I don't know, maybe you you might expect some of that.
Oh, for sure. And you probably also, I just saw in the paper the other day, and I think you've probably everyone has experienced this. People are driving aggressively, and that apparently is not just us thinking that. That is there's something like the largest number, despite all the improvements in car safety and traffic safety, that we've had more auto deaths via accident deaths this year since 1972. And that they say it's attributable to the fact that people are, angry, they're upset, they're frustrated, they're isolated, they're just driving differently. So, yes, we see that in the criminal justice system for sure as well.
I know we're all delighted to hear that our local law enforcement supports your programs.
Yes.
That is something that is really, really good to hear. When you talked about release of people from prison and getting them basically hooked up with their voting rights again, do you have any interaction with the Board of Elections to let them know that these people have completed their probation, they've paid their restitution, and you get in touch with them and work with the BOE?
Yeah, so well, we work with our Orange County, Rachel Raper, who is our county elections director. She gives us a lot of information that we include when people get a welcome bag when they're released from prison back into Orange County. And one of the things in the welcome bag is information about when they can get their voting rights restored and how they do it. But we have to be careful. We can't take people down there ourselves. But we make sure that they're aware of how simple it is. And there's also quite a few advocacy. There's a group called You Can Vote that I think works across the state, maybe even across the country. And they've actually gone into some of the jails around, especially around voter registration time, to make sure that people understand that, they can register to vote even if they're incarcerated, if they're not convicted of a felony, if they're just awaiting trial, they're eligible to vote. So we've partnered with them, had them come and speak to our reentry council. So yeah, so it is really important, and it's so easy for people to think that they've been disenfranchised permanently.
Oh, I know. I've got a question here. With all of the government people you work with, do you work in any way with any nonprofits?
Yes, we depend on our nonprofit partners to provide the programming that a lot of our diversion folks utilize. So we work, we work with treatment providers like Freedom House. We work with Boomerang for Youth. We have a lot of different youth programs that we have, but we also work with the Dispute Settlement Center. We have a close relationship with them. They do a lot of restorative justice work and mediation work with our folks. And then there's just, we work with a lot of different, are there any particular ones that you're interested in? We do depend on relationships with incredible partners that want to help and serve the people that we work with. So,
well, Anne has asked that question. If she has any particular program she's interested in, Anne, unmute yourself and speak up.
No, thanks. No, I don't. I was just curious.
That's great.
I'm looking at your, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking, that's at Amy's question.
Yeah, I'm gonna look at this one. Amy's in her car, so she can't, she's on a car trip, so I'm gonna read her thing to you all. Thank you for your work. She is an SLP studying the intersection of cognitive communication, learning disabilities, and a young person's involvement in the criminal legal system. There's some emerging evidence that suggests up to 80% of youth, mainly by people of color in juvenile jurisdiction, have cognitive communication disorders. Do Orange County diversion programs consider a young person's speech, learning, language, hearing abilities during intake assessments?
Absolutely. That's why we have social workers working as coordinators for the programs. I think that's a really, really great point, Amy. There, when you talk about reading a youth who's been charged their Miranda rights. I mean, I'm not sure adults, I'm not sure I could understand exactly what that, you have the right to remain silent if you do, all of that thing that, they say. Do we think a 15-year-old is going to understand what really, that they really have a right to tell an officer, yes, I want my lawyer present, I want my parent present, I want, and I'm not going to say anything until I have that person present. That's not even a youth with any kind of cognitive issues or communication issues. It's just basic inability to understand these important rights that they have in the system. And it may just be an attorney talking to them and they're nodding along, or a judge talking to them and they're nodding along, but the reality is they have no idea what is happening and how to be heard. And so I do think it's really critical that, it's up to the attorney to make sure that they understand their client. It's up to, if we have anybody in our programs, to understand our clients, and it's up to a judge to understand who's in front of them. And to ask the questions to make sure that they fully understand what's happening. But I will say juvenile justice does a very thorough intake. They get school records. I mean, they talk to family members. So I think there is certainly an attempt to try and make sure they're fully understanding of the youth that's in front of them. But, I'm not sure law enforcement always has that same, they just, they don't have the training or the background necessarily, and they're the ones that have that first contact. What may seem like sort of standoffish behavior or even disrespectful behavior might be, a young person who's on the spectrum. And we've seen, that happen. And it's one of the, it's tragic. We do have a mental health court here in Orange County. It does not serve youth, but I have a personal interest in this because there's a case that went up to the U.S. Supreme Court out of Chapel Hill schools. It was a 13-year-old youth who was interrogated in the schools for a series of breaking and enterings, and I represented him. And he was an exceptional child. He was a very, very large African-American 13-year-old boy. His guardian, his grandmother, refused to let the police talk to him. So what the police investigators did was go to the school and get them to take him out of class and put him in a room and threatened him with detention. And he ultimately confessed. So I filed a motion to suppress the statement. I lost, but the case got appealed and ultimately went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So I got to go up and watch the case argued. And even though it lost at the trial level with me, and it lost at the North Carolina Court of Appeals, and it lost at the North Carolina Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court reversed. Ooh, sorry about that. Reversed it and granted relief and said that was, that you have to look at the person and the youth that's in front of you. And if It's not just one size fits all. If they don't, if they have special needs or any learning issues, that can all be factored into their ability to understand the interrogation procedure. So I'm very interested in this, and I absolutely would agree with that evidence that says probably up to 80% of a youth, specifically youth of color, and I think it's the easiest to look over for youth of color. It tends to be that our wealthier white kids that come through the system, their parents have taken full advantage of trying to get every specialist to identify their needs, which is wonderful and what any parent would want to do, but they're not always, the schools don't identify people appropriately, the criminal justice system doesn't identify people appropriately, so we have to really be absolutely mindful of that. So I appreciate that question, Amy, very much.
You mentioned that there were some other counties that had similar programs. Do you know which counties those are?
Yeah, so Chatham does not, unfortunately, even though we share a judicial district, they do not. It depends on the county commissioners and their willingness to fund. Durham has a very robust criminal justice resource center. Buncombe County has a robust criminal justice center. So does New Hanover County. Those are the main counties.
Okay, and there are maybe a few others. And Ms. Krishna.
You're on mute.
Well, Paul asked.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay, sorry. You'd think I would learn after 2 years, right? But no. So thank you. That was an incredible talk. And thank you also for the work that you do. I have a question. You keep saying that the law enforcement and the court system, they support you. How do they know about your work? Do you go and advertise? Do you have to sit down with them? Or how do you promote your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm sitting here in the courthouse. Our department is embedded in the courthouse. Not all of it. We have people over at the health department, but I'm here in the courthouse, and a lot of our folks, the majority of our folks, are here in the courthouse. So we are fully embedded with our court stakeholders. I also happen to have worked here as a public defender, years ago, and so I do know a lot of people here. So I came in with sort of a lot of relationships. But interestingly, the sheriff has been an incredible, and I mean, the minute I got in this position, he was invested and interested. No one has more interest in trying to keep people out of the detention center than our sheriff. I mean, it's his folks that are responsible for the detention center. They don't want to have people in the detention center that don't need to be there or that present with significant behavioral health issues, because they're not equipped to handle folks like that. And a person with severe mental health issues can also be a danger to the staff. So he very much embraced sort of the let's get people out of our detention center and I want to support you in doing that. So he's been always been a wonderful supporter. And but Chief Blue is a huge supporter in Chapel Hill. Our district attorney's office has always been very supportive, has always supported any grant I've written. I provide a lot of data to them. They appreciate getting that data. We do a lot of work for keeping their caseloads a little bit lighter. They're still pretty heavy, but they're all for diverting people from the system. So, I think some agencies have been a little bit more reluctant to embrace diversion, but I would say that they're pretty much all on board now. They want to handle. They're understaffed. Law enforcement folks are understaffed and they're demoralized, and they don't want to focus on the people that used to be served by the hospital or treatment providers, and are now being served by law enforcement because there's just no other place for them to go. They want to focus on the real criminals out there, the major crimes. They don't want to have to respond to a call for somebody who's homeless. They didn't go into, they're not social workers. I like that Janet is engaging in the happy hour portion of the event tonight, getting her wine brought to her.
That's
Nice.
right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. I'm just jealous. But yeah, they really embrace it, because I think they know intimately that this is not why they went into law enforcement. It's not to bring youth into the criminal justice system or to arrest people because they're homeless and committing minor offenses. So yeah, it's been the biggest surprise, and also the most pleasant surprise of this work is just how easy it has been to partner with our stakeholders.
Paul has one last question for you about the people who are arrested that you serve. Are they only Orange County residents who have been arrested, or if somebody's from another county and is arrested in Orange County, are you serving them as well?
Yeah, good question. Both. They do have to either have been either an Orange County resident or be charged in Orange County.
Okay, that's wonderful to know. This has been so fabulous.
Oh, you guys have such wonderful questions, and thank you for your interest in all of this. So
we want to be able to share what we've learned from you with other members of our community, because I think a lot of our community isn't aware.
Yeah,
I know
programs. And having you here lets us share with everybody I know in the neighborhood. They'll all be coming to see you shortly.
No, I mean, that is part of my job, is to get the information out. There's so much to be done that it's often hard, but I always welcome opportunities to speak, and I'll send other people out from our department who are also doing amazing, who are doing amazing work. They love to speak too. So yeah, we like what we're doing here. We're proud of what we're doing here. We really we have a great community that supports this, and that's why our elected officials, are putting the money behind it. And, but it is true that there are a lot of people who don't know that this is happening, and I'd be happy for you all to share. And feel free to get in touch with me about any questions, or if you know somebody who's, involved in the justice system and you have a question about it. I mean, like I said, I'm here at the courthouse. We have good relationships with folks, so don't hesitate. I can't take care of a traffic ticket for you, but I can certainly check on somebody, or if you have a question about, the process or anything, I can help you.
Well, thank you so very much for joining us this evening. We really do appreciate it.
You are most welcome. And thank you for the work that you do. I really appreciate that as well.
And we can help get people registered to vote too, if they come out of criminal justice and need help.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, all. Thank you for joining us, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
She was